Hello and welcome along to another manager special from the Honest Football Podcast. And we are back for our second attempt at Bristol Rovers after Joey Barton has been announced on a 2.5-year deal, replacing Paul Tisdale, who had recently been sacked after just a couple of months in charge. Now, I'm going to come to Charlie first this time because I don't often do that. And we're going to talk about the outgoing manager first. I know everyone's excited about the Joey Barton thing, but let's talk about the old manager, which we always do first. We'll put the link in the eye above to the Paul Tisdale episode just 3 months or so ago. And at that point, Charlie, we discussed the fact that it was going to need to be patience, a long-term appointment. It was going to need to be backing in the window because we all highlighted they'd struggle this season due to the lack of goals with Johnson Clark-Harris going. He didn't get backed in January. He didn't get given time. Is there any surprise it's ended this way?
No, and the thing is, I think you got to have a lot of respect for him in a sense. He was quite vocal about that. I think a lot of managers would have gone under the, just done the standard press releases. But I think he was quite vocal that he hasn't been backed. And I think you take it into, I quite like doing this, take it into any industry. If you don't feel like you've got the backing of the people above you, it's going to make your job really difficult. But yeah, I mean, the investment, when you go for someone like Paul Tisdale, you've only got to look at what he did at Exeter. But he did such an amazing job with such limited resources. I don't understand why they didn't see it as an investment. For me, I just don't understand. I don't understand why he was there in the first place. And like you say, if you're not going to back him longer term, and maybe the investment wasn't there, why have him in the first place? That club, the club needs a big overhaul. They never replaced the strikers that they lost. The defensive, they've been woeful. So I don't know. We'll talk about who's coming next, but it's a bigger job than what I think people are giving it credit for, to be honest.
Craig, coming over to you, I guess we mentioned, and one of the big things that came up after the Ben Garner stint at the start of the season was the lack of goals. They lost Johnson Clark-Harris, who has been banging them in at Peterborough. They didn't really replace them with established strikers, more took a punt on younger ones from the lower leagues, which is fine, but you've got to then limit your expectations. But in terms of the rates under the two managers, thinking of devil's advocate here, under Ben Garner, in the first 11 games, they scored 11, conceded 19. And for Paul Tisdale, he managed 15 games, scored 13 and conceded 22. So ironically, he made them slightly better defensively, but made them a bit less potent going forward when they were already struggling for goals. Can you kind of see the board side of things?
You can, and obviously the table doesn't lie. 19th at the moment, they're literally 2 points above the relegation zone. I always think chairmen are under pressure. When they make a second managerial sacking in a season, it tends to be like the chairman is panicking. And it doesn't look good. It's more of a rush job, despite who he's brought in. But you don't help yourself when you don't back someone in the transfer window. Yes, I know finances are hard, obviously with COVID at the moment, no fans in the ground, all that stuff. But surely with the deal that Peterborough made for Johnson Clark-Harris, surely you have some backing. Yeah, you could say that obviously chairman made probably a good decision, but what was his point from hiring Paul Tisdale in the first place?
In terms of that, I completely agree with you, Craig. They're not investing in the squad, but they've got enough money to pay. They've got to pay Paul Tisdale's contract off, I assume. I don't know. I'm not there to speculate how much, but if they've got enough money to do that, surely they would have enough money to get in a strike. Even if you go down to the National League or something like that, there would have been players who would have come up. Do you know what I mean? And it'd have been a good striker in Conference now, South Conference North. That's now void. Do you know what I'm getting at? There was ways of investing. They didn't need to go and get a like for like with Johnson Clark-Harris, but they did need to strengthen up top. But the money they're probably paying Paul Tisdale off with, they could have invested with players lower down the leagues. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of mentality, it's that kind of recruitment that really worries me about Bristol Rovers. It's just the way they're recruiting it this season particularly just seems very, very bizarre.
And then going back to you, Charlie, I guess the final question on Paul Tisdale before we move on to the new man is there was this bizarre set of statements that came out in the first few days after he left the club. So Widrington, who was the director of football, who then took caretaker charge, he talked about the fact that Paul Tisdale had said what you said about not being backed, not having the strikers in, and had said about sort of, well, if you tell the strikers they're not very good, they're going to believe it. Words to that essence. I mean, it was a bizarre statement to see coming out of a professional football club, but can you kind of see the point?
Yeah, I mean, if that's the way his man management is, then fair enough. I suppose that's his style, but I still don't think that means you can't back him. If that's the case, he must have come out in that. He's been a manager for however many years. You know what you're sort of getting. So if he's saying that, do I agree with that as a man management style? Probably not. But the chairman, this goes back to exactly what I was just saying a minute ago about recruitment. They must have done, they've done a decent job in terms of their recruitment process. They'd have known that that's the sort of manager he was. I don't think that that's a good enough excuse to get rid of him if you look at what he's done at previous clubs, personally.
Now, having said that, We come to the new man, Craig, with the club basically in the same position as the last managerial special. There, they were within a couple of points of the relegation zone. Here, they're within a couple of points of the relegation zone. So after one win and one defeat in caretaker charge, they drew a blank again in the last game at the weekend. We've got Joey Barton in. And the first comment on social media was something that I picked up on immediately and was very excited about, which he'll be assisted by Andy Mangan and Clint Hill, who is going to be a massive figure in this speech, but we'll get to him later. But Craig, talking about timing, before we talk about Joey Barton himself, with the next 3 games being Wigan and Burton, who are right in that bottom 7 with them, and Shrewsbury, who are the bottom of the pack above them, basically, you can't be surprised by the timing and the rush of the appointment after the weekend, can you?
No, to be honest, when you've got teams around you, you obviously want to beat the teams that's around you. And what better way to grow momentum when a new manager's come in, bring a few different ideas in, as we've all said before. But yeah, it's vitally important. I don't think you want to wait after these next 3 games to hire a new manager when you basically want to target 9 points out of these 3 games, to be honest. So the timing's right. The managerial choice is okay, in my opinion. But yeah, the timing's perfect, really, to get a new manager in, new idea, teams around you. Let's find a way to get some points, really, go from there.
Absolutely. And obviously, if the new manager bounce we talk about is active, then this is the perfect time for it, as you say. But Charlie, coming back over to you, let's talk about the man himself. Craig mentioned the word okay. He's a little bit on the fence, I can see, or he's not quite sure. But Charlie, coming to you, he has got League One experience. He has built a club and made them gradually better over a couple of years, a bit like we said Paul Tisdale had. So at the risk of us saying exactly the same as we said in the last Bristol Rovers special, do you think he's the right appointment? And what was your initial reaction? Because the negotiations dragged on for a week or so.
I'm sure I had Fleetwood in the playoffs, if not even to go up, because of Joey Barton. You know, when we did the pre-season predictions, obviously he started the season at Fleetwood. He's a very meticulous manager. He's a very meticulous person. You can see that. Whether you agree with his outlook on life and things that he does off the pitch, you know, that's irrelevant to this debate. He's a very thorough person in the way he approaches stuff. So he'd have thought about this, in my opinion, this job very, very carefully. It wouldn't have been a snap decision. It wouldn't have been one that he'd have taken lightly, which makes me think he must see something in this squad and something in this team that he can work with. I think his 40% win percentage, I think, just shy of, is literally almost identical to Paul Tisdale, you know, in terms of when his stint at Exeter. You're getting a certain manager who's young, who's hungry, but you're going to get someone who's uncompromising. And that's my only worry with this. I think, footballing-wise, I think he's suited to them. I think he can get a lot out of the sort of squad that is struggling up top, because I think he's done that at Fleetwood. He's managed to get a small sort of pool of resources and work a lot with them. My worry is that is he going to clash with the chairman? And that's not a reflection on him. I'm saying that you've got a chairman who's a bit wishy-washy as it is. Joey Barton's very stout in his views and he backs himself. You know, the dynamic of that's going to be really interesting. Is he going to be given free rein to do what he wants to do and work what he did at Fleetwood, which he did a good job given the resources that they've got there? Or is it going to be a bit more like it was with Paul Tisdale, a bit of interference and a bit of, you know, you can't have this player, you can't have that player? Because I can't imagine if that's the case, Joey Barton's going to be around for 2.5 years or however long he signed for, you know?
Yeah, and coming back to you, Craig, on that exact point, I mean, Charlie mentions the chairman, but there were a lot of grumblings with the Paul Tisdale thing about the director of football, Tommy Witherington. Do you see that as a risk as well? Do you see a potential clash there too?
Yeah, of course there is. There's strong personalities all around, and things all 3 got to work together. Obviously, from manager, director, football, of recruitment. Obviously, there's going to be no recruitment now until the end of the season because obviously the window is shut. It depends on how the chairman obviously reacts to what Joe Barton wants to be like, his philosophy, his tactics, all that stuff. Because clearly, it sounds like obviously the chairman didn't believe in Paul Tisdale. They just gone by the name of Paul Tisdale and what he done at Exeter and MK Dons. So I feel like it's going to be the same. I've got Joey Barton on the name, Joey Barton, the former Newcastle, Manchester City player, but the reputation can be a bit of a nuisance. Obviously, the person, obviously, what happened with Stendhal and the final days at Fleetwood with obviously Ched Evans. It should be in the back of your mind, really. Not it should be the main focus, but it could be on the back of your mind. So they all got to work together. To be honest, Joey Barton will say how he feels. He won't hide behind anyone. So I can either go 2 ways. Either be fantastic, it's just going to blow up in everyone's face, and he'll be gone by May.
Charlie, I mean, it's the last question I'm going to ask on the negatives. We always have a balanced debate here, so we have to mention these points. Craig mentions the fact that they're all strong characters, that Joey Barton won't hide how he feels. And given the fact that the noises sense that was part of Paul Tisdale's demise alongside the results, is this appointment, particularly on a longer deal, surely not a bit of a risk from the club point of view if they're not 100% sure he's the perfect man?
I think it's a risk if you don't. It's not my way or the highway with him, but I think if you don't meet his standards or meet his demands or meet work ethic, because no matter what you're on a level at Joey Barton, I think one thing you can say even as a player is he's had an incredible work ethic, box to box, the whole. So what I'm saying is I would imagine he takes that, and this would be a lot easier if they'd have released that Fleetwood documentary. We'd have a much better insight into his management style. But I do think that the moment that's not met and people aren't on the same level of work ethic with him, not necessarily quality, but work ethic, I think that's when you're going to get problems. So yeah, it's a huge risk. You're not talking about someone who's just going to hide it like a wallflower and just take it to keep their money going. He doesn't need to do that. His reputation's on the line with this. So for me, it's a massive risk, if I'm honest. Could pay off. I like him as a manager. I've taken out all the other stuff. I think as a manager, he's a good manager. I would like to think that all the other stuff won't get in the way of that. But that's the risk you get with Joey Barton, unfortunately.
And Craig, come back to you before we talk about our final bit at the end about how they're going to do for the season and beyond and whether he's the right man. We have got to talk a little bit about the statement, because it's sort of matched a few of the League One and Two clubs recently, which is talking about the focus of promoting players from within, from developing youth, basically highlighting the fact that there isn't an endless pool of money in League One and League Two now. So based on Joey Barton's experience at Fleetwood and the way that he sort of brought together a relatively young squad in a lot of areas, is he potentially, on the pitch, the perfect man for them?
He's got to find the right characters to fit his style of play. Obviously, they've got to start winning games and they've got to start scoring. Top goal scorer Brandon Hanlon is on 6 goals. That is not good enough. They're playing for their lives, really. If you're in a relegation battle, you're playing for your lives. They've got to iron out what's gone wrong this season. Joey Barton will say how it is. It might not be pretty, but we need to get those 3 points.
Absolutely. And that's the thing we've got to measure this season, is to get out of a relegation scrap. It very often isn't pretty. So I guess we can't expect that straight away. But let's talk about the rest of the season, as we always do. I'm obviously very excited about the fact that he's assisted by Clint Hill and Andy Mangum, but it's not something that I'm sure is going to get a lot of views or be excitable to many. So I'm not going to get too excited. I will just point out Clint Hill was a skipper for many, many years, and probably in the dressing room is the sort of character you would like to have based on his experience at QPR in particular. But looking at the League One table, lads, I'll come to you first, Charlie. They're 2 points clear of relegation. I mean, most of the sides down there have played in and around the same number of games. They've got the second worst attacking record in the league, joint with Shrewsbury. Probably the best defensive record of the bottom 7, ironically. So do you see the same pattern continuing, or do you see a different approach? What do you see for the rest of the season at Bristol Rovers?
I think they'll be fine. And I'll tell you for why, because if you look at a quarter of their goals have been conceded between 20 and 30 minutes of a game, which is ludicrous, really, to be honest, at the professional level, to have that many of your goals going in. That's the key point. Even Sunday League, we've all played it. That's that key point when you settle into the pattern of the game and all of that. To be conceding more goals in that point of the game than any other, that for me is not an ability thing. That's a concentration. That's the demands that are being put on you. So I think Joey Barton, out of any manager in that league, is going to demand the most out of you and probably possibly inspire you. I think that they'll be fine, because I think that defensively they'll shore up. Clint Hill, defensive-minded player, fantastic, leader of people. I think that can galvanise you enough. So the goals, obviously, they're scoring less than a goal a game on average and conceding a goal and a half, however you work out the maths of that. If he sorts that out, the next 3 games are crucial, obviously, as we mentioned. But I think if they can shore up that first half, especially that 20 to 30-minute period, I don't see there being any problems. I think there's too many teams around them that are leaking goals far too much, even though they might be outscoring them. And I think that's one of the things that I would target straight away is how are we setting up in that middle period of the game. They score more goals. Most of their goals come in the first 10 minutes of a game, but then they concede more in the next 20 to 30. So that has to be a setup issue. That's not a talent issue. That's not a player ability thing. I think that's just the way you're inspiring maybe the message you're sending them out within their ears. And I think Joey Barton will be very good at that. He'll demand so much of them, as will Clint Hill. So on that basis, I think they'll be fine. I'd say fine, they'll be safe. I'm not expecting them to go rolling up to 12th or something, but I think there's too many teams around there that have got bigger issues than them.
And Craig, as we mentioned, the bottom 7 is almost its own mini league at the moment. So do you see Bristol Rovers being one of the 3 that's safe? What do you think for the rest of the season?
I think they'll be fine, to be fair, for Bristol Rovers. It's tight, but the good thing for Bristol Rovers, they've got a game in hand over Northampton and Wigan and Swindon. So obviously they've got to take advantage of it. But yeah, I think they'll be fine. There's a lot more worse teams out there at the moment than Bristol Rovers.
And the final question for each of you boys, as it always is. Charlie, first to you. Is Joey Barton the right man? And do you think he will guide Bristol Rovers to success, if we think they're going to stay up this year, as you both do, the following season as well?
I wasn't happy with what happened with Paul Tisdale, but I think if you were going to have to replace him, I think Joey Barton was the next best option out there. I don't think next year. I think it's a slower build. This, if I'm honest, he was getting there with Fleetwood. I expect the same as what happened with Fleetwood in terms of taking the off the pitch stuff out of there. What was happening on the pitch, I expect the same with Fleetwood. I think this is a 2 or 3 year job at least. But if they can hold on to him for that contract that he signed, the second full year he gets, I can't see why they couldn't be around the playoffs. I don't expect much next year, though. I think there's a bigger overhaul that they need to do before you can think about that, similar to what we did at Fleetwood.
And Craig, final words to you. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or somewhere in between?
No, I agree, to be fair. Like, clearly it hasn't worked with Ben Garner and Paul Tisdale this season, so they're going to have to change their style of play. Paul Tisdale will want to play some really good football. Joey Barton might want to be a bit more aggressive, maybe a bit more direct. It depends on who they got. He's got up top to hold the ball up. Just something different to be more aggressive. If Bristol Rovers survived this season, yeah, he'll definitely need to back in the summer. They'll just plug up the table again like they have been for the last few seasons. They won just about mid-table and go from there.
And I'll obviously say that yet again, I think in terms of this season, we're all in agreement, and that didn't go quite so well with Paul Tisdale. So apologies to Bristol Rovers fans in advance if the same happens. But hopefully it won't. We'd like to see them start. We think they're a good club, and hopefully they will do. I am going to say on the longer term thing, though, I disagree with both of you. And I'm normally the positive one here, but I've got a suspicion. In the summer, he's probably not quite going to get what he wants. And I think there's going to be some big fallout around September, October time next year. But, I've been wrong before, so it wouldn't be the first. But that's all for this managerial special. Let us know what you think if you're a Bristol Rovers fan down in the comments. Of course, you can see what we said about Paul Tisdale in the eye above and see just how much of it went wrong there before you judge us on this one. If you did enjoy this one, please do put a thumbs up on it. Subscribe down below for regular content from the Honest Football Podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter at Honest Football Free to stay up to date with all our content. And hopefully we'll see you next time.